This was originally recorded late 2022. Life got in the way and it didn't get published. But I think it's excellent, so here it is. Autumn provided 2 updates. 1, our chocolate bone broth is now available. 2, we are not working with the chicken producer focusing on genetics, but only because they went bankrupt. We are still working with their team potentially, though.
Hi, this is Tucker Goodrich. I am here with Autumn Smith and John Etchart of Paleovalley / Wild Pastures. They're a food company. If you guys could introduce yourselves. Autumn, why don't you go first?
My name's Autumn, and I'm one of the co-founders of, like you said, Paleovalley, Wild Pastures, and more recently, Wild Pastures Burger Company. And basically, I had a health transformation that started with an ancestral diet, and I've just become a little bit obsessed with helping other people understand that potential and have really high quality options. So obsessed that I went back to school and I got my master's, and I'm working on my doctorate right now. And I live in Boulder, and I have a son and a husband named Chas.
There you go. John, go ahead.
Yeah, so my name is John Etchart. I'm fortunate enough to be Autumn's brother-in-law. My background, well, I grew up ranching a little bit. I turned over to accounting, and over about 10 years, I got to know, reconnected with Autumn and her family, got to know Chas, and really, experienced some health benefits from the paleo diet as well. And from there, I've been a partner in Wild Pastures and co-founder, and then also in Paleovalley, and have had a lot of fun growing these businesses with Autumn and Chas and the others.
Awesome. That's terrific. Autumn, tell us a little bit more about your health story, because you, like most of us, you were sick for years and were kind of, how shall we say this, not helped by your physicians.
Yeah, exactly. And I think if you would have asked even John, who knew me since I was 10, my brother-in-law, like how my life would have turned out or what I would be doing, founding a, organic food business wouldn't have had anything to do with it. I was a bit of a mess, but it all started with digestive issues when I was around 10, and I had irritable bowel syndrome, which we know is kind of a wastebasket diagnosis. That kind of means we've ruled out serious pathology and we don't know what's going on.
Right.
And when I took, all the Beano that they told me to and nothing changed, I just kind of went about my business. And in high school, my gut issues kind of started to transform into also mental health issues, anxiety, depression, all the things. We went to the psychiatrists and no one really knew what to do with me. We tried antidepressants that didn't work. And no one ever thought about the gut and brain connection like we do today. And so diet wasn't even in the realm of possibility. So instead, I got into substances, alcohol, anything I could get on my hands on to kind of calm me and numb my pain.
Right.
And I did that.
Not an unusual response, by the way.
Right. No, I just felt like, okay, I'm always going to be uncomfortable. I'm always going to struggle emotionally. So I'm going to have to learn a way to manage. And there wasn't anything else I knew to do at that time. But fortunately, I still had a great family and I loved dance and I went to college and I met my husband who, when he looked at me and saw my life up close, saw behind the smile, he realized I was really suffering. And so as his new wife, he made it his mission to kind of, we got to figure this out. And he found on Google some people finding diet was useful. And we were both reticent, but very pleasantly surprised when after 30 days of just dietary change that involved cutting out processed foods, all my digestive issues went away. And then over the course of the next year, I just became a new version of myself, like calm and stable and actually able to, thrive rather than just survive and manage through the day. And so then we decided we needed to go into physical products because I was working as a celebrity fitness trainer and traveling the world. And it became
okay, let's get into that in a minute. But describe a little bit where you heard about this and what changes you actually tried to make.
Yeah, I think it was like, of course, Lauren Cordain was one of the ones, and then Mark Sisson, and I think Rob Wolf back in, 2007-ish. And so
Right.
Chaz was like, let's just go shop at a farmer's market. Let's get, I think in the beginning, we were even still using fermented bread occasionally, but it was just fruits, vegetables, high quality animal products. We cut out the seed oils. In the very beginning, we cut out the processed foods. And that's basically the changes that we made. And we kind of followed that ancestral template. And like I said, within 30 days, my digestive issues were gone. And I was so
And how
impressed.
old were you at that point?
I was probably 26.
So
26.
16 years.
A long time. And I was so baffled by this that I literally got 200 of my friends together and was like, guys, I feel like there's some big potential here. And I'm going to tell you how to do this diet. We're going to make a Facebook group. And then when we did, and they experienced these results, Chaz and I were just like, oh man, we've got to figure out a way to share this and figure out a way to make these products accessible. So that's what
Great. That's awesome. Yeah, that's very similar in some respects to my own story. You're lucky figuring it out when you're 26. I didn't figure it out until I was 42, and I was much sicker at that point, you know. But similar stuff. Probably one of the most embarrassing things that happened to me was a guy I'd been working with. He was my right-hand man. I'd been probably working for him for 10 or 12 years, and he said to me one day, he said, Tuck, you're much nicer now that you fixed your diet.
Oh my gosh.
And I was mortified. I mean, great to be hearing this after the problem went away, but you can imagine how mortified I was.
Oh yeah. Chaz would tell me that too. I would go do the thing during the day and then come home and crumple into a ball and cry. And I was just anxious. And he was just like, wow, for that to all go away. It was just remarkable for our relationship and everything else. So
well, that's fantastic. God bless him for sticking with you and helping you work through it.
Seriously.
He sounds like a keeper.
Oh, I married up for sure. Let's just say that. Yeah. John knows. He's a good one.
That's awesome. John, what's your background? Autumn mentioned that you grew up on a ranch. Where was the ranch?
Yeah, I grew up on a ranch in northeastern Montana. My family ranched over 100 years in that part of the world. And
so you were Yellowstone. You were one of those guys.
Yeah, I guess so. I don't know. That shows a few liberties that don't really, communicate my experience, but
okay.
Pretty exciting. And unfortunately, we were on the plains eastern side of Montana, so we don't have the beautiful mountains.
The mountain backdrops, yeah.
But,
oh well.
But still, really enjoyed that. We grew up in town, but I spent a lot of my time on that ranch. And unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, my father sold the ranch when I was a senior in high school. Otherwise, that's probably where I would be and not actually be boots on the ground in the raising of these animals, but rather than coordinating e-commerce and my current responsibilities. But
a job with much less heavy lifting than ranch life.
Right. Yeah, that's right. So, but yeah, and as far as the land management and stuff like that, that's always been something very personal to my family. My father was, has always advocated for cattle on pasture. He even, like Autumn mentioned earlier, or maybe not on the call, but he brought Alan Savory up to northeastern Montana in 1982 to give
amazing.
information on rotational grazing and the benefits to the land because of that. It was much less. My dad's angle would be less, I'd say less in reducing carbon footprint and health back in those days, and it was more just for land health and soil health. And
which means you've got a more productive, profitable ranch.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
Yep, exactly right. Yes. So that was very personal to him. He spent a lot of time in the years following that as president of the Public Lands Council, fighting the BLM on the increases in the grazing fees, because I mean, what's important is having those animals there. It holds the soil together. And so that was something very personal in our family. And then when he sold the ranch, I had to go to college and figure out what I was going to do. Decided to be an accountant. And became a CPA, but then over the years, reconnected with Autumn and Chaz and wanted to get involved in what they were doing. It just felt a lot bigger. So we founded Wild Pastures together 4.5 years ago now, and Paleovalley also continues to grow, and it's been a nice transition for me.
That's awesome. That's great to hear. I mean, that's amazing that he was talking to Alan Savory back in 1982. you mentioned Rob Wolf before, Autumn. He's now up in Montana, if I remember correctly, and is trying to help other ranchers realize the benefits of that way of raising cattle. I know it's it sounds easy for an armchair guy like me to say, oh, you just need to do this, but it's a lot more complicated. I live in Idaho now, which is cattle country. It's not just potatoes, believe it or not, and have started seeing some of these issues firsthand with, the problems that ranchers go through trying to raise cattle on public land and, all the water issues and everything else. It's really complicated stuff.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's great. That's amazing. So how did the food company idea come up, Autumn?
Yeah, that was basically because I was working as a fitness trainer for Tracy Anderson back in Los Angeles, and my final assignment was a 7-month world tour. And
Okay.
yeah, it was. I had just gotten married, so it was interesting timing. But I tried to do my best to maintain the ancestral health principles that I had just learned was really fundamental to the way that I wanted to feel. But it was really, really hard. And I even had.
What year was that? That was
in 2012.
2012. Yeah. So back then it was really tough.
Oh, it was very tough.
I mean, you'd say, I want a gluten-free, and they'd be like, what's gluten?
Oh yeah. And then you go to other countries. I mean, when we were in
Right.
Istanbul, or I mean, you're like, whatever. I mean, just yeah, it wasn't like it is today. And so I even had Chaz bring over some like grass-fed beef sticks when we met me in Paris, like a suitcase full of them. And they just still didn't make me feel great. And so when I got back to America, I was like, let's figure this out for people who don't want to spend every moment in the kitchen or just don't have that luxury. And let's figure out why the beef sticks might have been still bothering my digestion, and just go into physical products, because we believed that, people were already able to educate themselves based on even the limited amount of voices there were at that period in time. So we want to just meet the other demand for convenience.
I should mention that Autumn has her own podcast for Paleovalley. What's it called? What's your podcast's official name?
It's called the Optimized Paleo Podcast. So that was like one of the first things I did, I think 5 or 6 years ago. I was just like, I need to be able to share like the most brilliant minds, and Tucker was obviously one of those.
Yeah, that's a mystery to me, but anyway, but at any rate, after that, Autumn sent me a care package of food from Paleovalley and from Wild Pastures, and I will confess that I'm a little biased. We had a delicious roast chicken last night that was a Wild Pastures chicken, and it's the first chicken that my wife and I have had, I think, together since we got married a few years ago, and it's the first chicken she's had since she used to raise her own chickens on her organic farm in upstate New York. And she was, initially we were a little nervous about eating it, and she kept going back for more afterwards. So we'll consider that a win. And she loves the beef sticks too. So yeah, it's good stuff. Good stuff. Just want to get that out of the way. I'm not an unbiased participant here. It's good stuff. And we'll put some links to all that in the show notes afterwards. So, okay. So what did you find out? I mean, beef sticks were one of my staple cheap foods, because they're one of the few things that you can find, at like gas stations, and that keep without having to worry about refrigeration. And what did you find out? What was your avenue to trying to make a better beef stick?
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously we learned, gluten sometimes, sugar. I don't even know why you need sugar in a meat stick, but a lot of them have sugar and other additives and low quality oils sometimes. But there's an ingredient called encapsulated citric acid. So essentially they take genetically modified corn and then they like put it in this coating of hydrogenated oil, a lot of times cottonseed or just vegetable oil. And then these little beads just melt into the product, which drops the pH and makes it really stable. Right. So
okay,
it's a small amount.
So it's a citric acid is a natural preservative.
Exactly.
But they're doing in this hydrogenated oil coating
Exactly. And then it just melts into the product. And, you know, I had already eliminated a lot of those other things from my diet. So it could have been those things, those other additives, and gluten and MSG and all those things. But I thought, well, why do we have to preserve something with hydrogenated oil, which is obviously something we know isn't great for our health? And so we called a bunch of manufacturers and they said, no, this is the industry standard. No one really cares. Nobody even blinks at it when you put it on a label, like just kind of get over it. So we literally 200 calls later, we found somebody saying, okay, I'm willing to try fermenting these, because I thought we've been eating meat forever. How have we been doing this before? And meat fermentation was our answer. And so one manufacturer is actually like, I'll take a chance on you, even though it's not as lucrative and it takes 4 times longer and it makes 0 sense. But if it's really that important to you.
Except for health.
Exactly. Exactly. That's how I was like, yes, we want to be a company. And that is the base of our company. We want to be a company that prioritizes health over profit at every step. And so that was just, yeah, we said, yes, obviously you want to try it. And it gave that, you know, different kind of texture too, which I think is why a lot of people really like it. It's more like, I hate the word moist, but it has a little moisture and a snap to it rather than being like a jerky.
Okay, that's really interesting. I hadn't realized that. I mean, I've made my own sauerkraut. Once I got over the explosions in the kitchen, that was really beneficial. And I tried making, by the way, folks, if you're gonna ferment stuff at home, make sure you leave enough room at the top, because the pressure builds up and it will go boom, which just happened to happen to me when I was standing 5 feet away, and it scared the living daylights out of me. Luckily, nobody was injured in the making of this sauerkraut. But no, I also made salsa, fermented salsa, which is exactly like you say. If you get salsa at the store, it's cooked and typically soaked in vinegar, and it makes the vegetables kind of soft and squishy. Whereas if you ferment it at home with raw vegetables, you get this crunchy, alive. It tastes alive. It tastes so much more, you know, just so much more real than when you get it in a jar from the store. And it's interesting to hear that you sort of see the same thing in meat when you're fermenting it.
Yeah, there's just a little bit of a tang. And my Polish friend says it's very similar to the like kielbasas that they have then. And in a more Americanized comparison, like those hickory smoked kind of summer sausages you get around Christmas time. So
right.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'd compare it to, but just a little snap. Right, John? How would you describe it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not as, you know, dry as a Slim Jim, but it
well,
feels
Slim Jims are somewhat equivalent to a shoelace. And by the way, that was one of my favorite foods growing up, so I'm not knocking Slim Jims, but
yeah.
Interesting. So how did getting those to market go? What's the price point compared to a regular meat stick?
Oh, John, tell me about that. That's
You
more
know,
of a
it depends. It's cheaper if you're on auto ship directly from us than you know, if you're buying one-offs or buying them, you know, elsewhere. But
okay,
you know, it's about double what you'd pay for a Slim Jim.
Okay,
but still, you know, an affordable snack for you know, you can see we sell 10 of them, you know, and if you take advantage of all the discounts, the auto ship discounts, stuff like that, you'd get 10 of them for about $16. So you're paying $1.60 a stick, while a Slim Jim for less meat would be, you know, under $1.
Right. And I think most of the people listening to this are going to get, you pay, you know, as Autumn and I went through, you either pay upfront for the food or you pay your healthcare provider who can't help your problem later on.
Yeah.
And my point of view, having tried both ways, is that it's a lot more fun being healthy and paying a little bit of a premium for food that's not going to make you sick in the long term.
And one thing we've learned, well, you know, in this business is that, you know, snacks and meat are a very low margin, you know, business to be in. And as Autumn spoke to earlier, it's just a much longer manufacturing process. So there are, you know, it just isn't more expensive than if we were using a lot of cheap preservatives that would, you know, make it a much less healthy option. So, but like you said, your audience and people like us would recognize that the benefit of paying for it now.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's an investment. And meat sticks, you know, as a convenience item if you're traveling or something. I mean, that was the biggest when Autumn and I got going on this round about the same time. I think I was a couple of years earlier. If you were traveling, it was really hard. There
Ugh.
were very few options. And, carrying a bag full of hard-boiled eggs only gets you so far.
It's
Right.
funny, the way these beef sticks are shaped, every time I come back from Wisconsin where we have them manufactured, I usually have a suitcase full of samples. And every time I get stopped by security because they look like packs of dynamite. So
That's hilarious. That is hilarious. So tell us a little bit about so you found this guy in Wisconsin who was willing to take a chance on this idea. What does he think about the product and the production now? I presume you've been able to optimize it as you've been working with him.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'd say I'll say a few things and then John, you can go for it. I think that he probably he didn't believe that we would be able to deliver like we've been able to do. And I think we've come to a point where we kind of like invested with him to build his own business just to meet our volume and demand. And there's a lot of companies who are kind of coming at him trying to do the same exact thing that we've been doing. So I think he's been really pleasantly surprised about how much in demand a product that prioritizes health is. But John works more directly with them, so he could probably give you another side of the story.
yeah, it's been very much a partnership between the two of our outfits, ever since the beginning. I know when we first started working with them, they were actually harvesting and animals and processing, beef down to primals at that time. And they immediately right after they had this opportunity, they're like, "Wow, that's not as much fun. Let's focus on these snack sticks." And fortunately, the growth of the company has been, enough to let them, eliminate
Focused on this.
that they didn't enjoy as much. That's also that's an interesting business too when you're in the harvesting and stuff like that, and a very tough business when you're not set up to be with scales of efficiency and stuff like that. But they
Right.
are very efficient when it comes to producing these snack sticks, and they've always been able to keep up with our growth, which have been impressive numbers to keep up with. We've
Well, congratulations. That's awesome.
nice.
And where do you get the meat? If they got out of the meat business to get more into the production business?
Yes, so it's a similar network that we're using for Wild Pastures now, but we just
Okay.
been in this business long enough. We've made many contacts all over the country that would raise cattle and produce the raw materials to the requirements that we would expect and our customers would expect. It really started out that we would be sourcing this from a handful of partners, the raw materials, and now Wild Pastures, our other company, has grown to the point where we can actually provide the ground beef that is used for these sticks, and turkey, chicken, and pork that is
Right.
used in all of our sticks for the Paleovalley.
So are you actually going out and are farmers, I guess the really interesting question here is, are farmers switching their production methods? Are you converting guys to, away from grain finishing beef into grass? I know typically for a rancher,
Mhm.
my tiny little experience is grass-fed and grain-fed generally is the same thing until they leave the ranch, and then they go to a finishing plant or to the butcher, I gather, if they're just going to be grass-fed.
Mhm.
Are you switching guys over?
Yeah, we are frequently reached out to by ranchers and farmers that would like to be a part of this and would like to change their practices and would like to learn how. At that point, we would hand them off to one of the many people that would, run our co-ops or facilitate that kind of thing. I mean, we work with a number of partners around the country that would, manage the raising of the cattle and the consolidation of those. And one thing that's very important is that I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that have had grass-fed steaks and stuff like that and would say, it's the worst steak they've ever had. But we know the people that have had grass-fed steaks when raised right that would say they're the best steaks they've ever had. So it's really important.
Yeah, I'm definitely in the latter camp.
Yes, that's good. Yes, and that's where we are too, and that's what we expect of our producers. And really, what's important is that you could technically have a grass-fed steak that is an older animal that was never sent to the feedlot, never consumed corn, but the
Right.
it served other purposes, and the farmer, sent them to harvest later on in their life, and they weren't necessarily being fed a ration that would keep them gaining weight every day of their lives and stuff like that. And that, unfortunately, that's what a lot of the grass-fed steaks on the market, come from. And then people have this negative association with the eating experience. But if it's done right, you have these animals being fed a ration that would keep them gaining weight every single day of their lives while avoiding the harmful grains and stuff like that. That's when you can get the great eating experience that we try to provide.
Right. Interesting. No, I hadn't realized that aspect of it. I mean, I know I have a friend here in Boise who's a rodeo cowboy. He does the roping, right?
Mhm.
He's the I forget what they call him. There's one guy who ropes the head and the other guy ropes the other end. He's the guy who ropes the other end, and buys these calves, the steers, so he can train with them. And he was like, nobody wants these steers. They're like so muscular, and it's like the meat's like shoe leather. It makes a huge difference because they're athletes, these steers, right? They're running away from him. And they're, it's, you don't really think about, when you're somebody like me who grew up in the New York City area, you don't really think about the nuances of ranching. A cow's a cow, right? They all sit out in the field and munch, right? Yeah, it's not quite that simple, I guess.
No, and I just wanted to say we've even, through the years been able to kind of really figure out, like John said, this specific formula that really works, because there is such a wide variation in the way it tastes, and we've tasted them all throughout the life of the company.
Right. Now that's why. So why are people reaching out to you guys? Is it just because you're paying them more than they've been getting from, one of the big meat packing operations? Are they doing it because they, buy into the health argument? What are their motivations? It reminds me of conversations we had 10 years ago where people were like, well, this is never going to work. You're never going to convince people that they shouldn't eat wheat. You're never going to convince people that they shouldn't eat grain finished beef.
Yeah.
And the naysayers were wrong. But I'm really interested to hear from the producer's side of things. Why do they want to get in on this?
Yeah, well, there certainly is a premium for raising grass-fed cattle that obviously is helps them cover their expenses.
Right.
It is a higher price point, but for the most part, the people that are reaching out to us are either very interested in the environmental impact and making a difference there, and also the health impact. But many of them just didn't have the opportunity to there just wasn't as much of a market for it as there was 10 years ago. So as they're learning more about the environmental benefits and health benefits, they want to be a part of it, and they hope that we can help them transition into a regenerative farm.
And growing up in Eastern Montana, I did have a lot of friends who were ranchers, other than John too. And in the beginning of this company, when we first founded, they were just beside themselves, kind of laughing at me like, okay, grass-fed, that's not really a thing. This is not going anywhere. And those same people have called me since and said, okay, you're right. This is the future, and this is where people are going. And so how do we transition? And so it's been really nice to see that.
That's phenomenal. That's really amazing. And it's, it's amazing. I mean, I think there's way too simplistic I remember listening to this great interview years ago. The folks who made the Epic bars were talking about getting acquired by General Mills. And the best comment out of that interview, when they said, the people at General Mills have kids and they have all the same health issues that everybody else does. And they want their kids to be healthy too. And they're, I don't, part of the reason why I wanted to talk to you guys was so I can get this message across, so people aren't like, oh, corporate bad, thinking we're all going to have to go live on the ground and survive by hunting elk up in Montana, which is not a scalable solution.
Definitely not for people like me. But yeah, I've heard that a lot of corporations are moving in that direction, because also they have these generational relationships with farms, right? These are people they invest in and really care about, and they see the writing on the wall. We destroy the soil, we're not making food anyway. So yeah.
Right. Interesting. So tell us about some of the other products you guys are producing. I mean, the beef sticks are like as far as I'm concerned, the no-brainer item. My wife loves them. She's always trying to figure out what to take to work because she always brings her own lunch, and they've become a staple for her.
Yeah. Well, many of the products, I'll kick this over to Autumn in a second, but many of our new products and our existing products are developed with the idea in mind that we want to utilize the entire animal. So when you harvest an animal, you end up with a bunch of stuff that nobody wants that ultimately gets thrown away. And we've been able to further process those, like the organs,
okay,
bones, stuff like that. So we have a grass-fed organ complex that has beef liver, heart, and kidney. We also have a bone broth protein, and it's just, we really try to make sure that we're using the entire animal so that nothing goes to waste. And then Autumn can speak further to Paleovalley products. But
yeah, and another way we do that is
John, you're the beef and animal guy. I'm gathering here.
Totally is. Yeah, he's the wild pastures guy. But also our beef tallow is another thing that we only fry our French fries in beef tallow in our restaurant. So I thought, Tucker, you would really appreciate that also.
Yeah. Okay, well, you're jumping ahead. Let's get to the restaurant later on. And that's in Boulder?
That's in Boulder. Yeah, first one's in Boulder.
Okay, we'll get to that later on. Kudos to you guys for that one, but let's just focus on some of the foods.
Okay, so some of the foods. Yeah, the other products. Basically, we did beef sticks first, and then we moved to the organ complex, like John said, because whole animal utilization, but also because they're literally the most nutrient-dense foods in the world. And Dr. Ty Beal's research has just kind of demonstrated that. And when I got pregnant with my son, I got really tired and dug into the research and realized, oh my gosh, no one's eating organs. And my dear, dear husband tried to make them in every different way possible. I could not stomach them no matter what. And so we just put them into capsules so that even if you didn't grow up on organs, you could eat them. And the other really kind of like main driver besides like creating, really accessible products is synergy. We're big believers that there is a wisdom in whole foods that you can't replicate in a lab. Yeah, that we're really just scratching the surface of nutrition and nutritional science. And so we did like a whole food vitamin C, because most vitamin C is genetically derived from corn, and then it's just the antioxidant outer layer. And so we were like, okay, what if we found the most vitamin C rich foods in the world and then put them into a capsule, and people could take vitamin C in whole food form. So we did that. We also did apple cider vinegar complex with other herbs like turmeric and ginger and cinnamon. These herbs that are well demonstrated anti-inflammatory, pro-digestive, like all of these benefits that people don't want to just eat every day, right? So you could just take them as a digestive aid. And then we have like mushrooms. We know medicinal mushrooms in at least one trial.
Non-psychedelic mushrooms, I'm presuming.
Non-psychedelic, yeah.
When you say medicinal mushrooms, you better be careful there.
That's true. Thanks, Tucker. Yeah. So medicinal mushrooms, but most people actually grow mushrooms to the mycelial stage, and then it's on grain. And the thing about it is then they just don't separate the grain from the actual mushroom. And so a lot of, sometimes up to like 45% of a product is actually grain. And so we wanted to create a really high quality mushroom supplement that was just from the fruiting body. And because, lion's mane was able to reduce mild cognitive decline, and there's just a lot of benefits of mushrooms. And then superfood bars, like he said, our protein collagen powder, we're coming out with a lot of new products like our whey. We're working on a cereal. We're working on suckers that actually put superfoods in. That's the whole thing. It's rather than taking everything out like gluten and sugar and everything else, we also are as focused on like, well, what are you actually eating and how is the quality of that product, and are they contributing to health? So what across our line is basically the highest quality we can find, regeneratively raised beef, organic ingredients, and just none of the sugar and anything else. So we also have a super greens powder. A lot of people who have digestive issues don't know, and I found this to be very true for me, that wheatgrass, cereal grasses in general, they can contain a lectin called wheat germ agglutinin.
Yes.
So
a very nasty chemical.
Exactly. Linked to a whole host of things, detriment to your gut, and, maybe increasing or like kind of inhibiting the ability of vitamin D and insulin.
Well, it also gets through your gut wall and gets into your systemic circulation. It's a pretty nasty thing.
It's a nasty.
These are pesticides, right? The plants grow their own pesticides. Wheat gluten is a pesticide, and it has specific effects on a insect's digestive tract that kills the bug, right? And for some of us, it does the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. I used to take a shot of wheatgrass when I worked at my fitness studio, and afterwards I don't feel good. And I just did a wheatgrass greens powder the other day for a continuous glucose monitor experiment, and it was just instant. I just hurt. So we just wanted greens powder without that. So we use really high quality spirulina and just fruits and vegetables. So basically we're just trying to create an equivalent on the market for basically any product that is of the highest quality in terms of its sourcing, but also doesn't contain any of the additive chemicals or unnecessary sugars, but that also adds a lot of these superfoods that you might not otherwise be able to access, so that they can just be like staples in your diet.
Interesting. And I have two thoughts floating around in my mind. What products have you tried that haven't worked?
Oh, John, I can't even think of one that we've had that hasn't so far.
We've had some that haven't worked based on scalability. Some of those problems we're trying to solve.
Such as?
I'd say one would be the bone broth protein powder that we're.
Okay.
I mean, it's very popular. Everybody loves it. It's just that it's not as scalable as we'd like it to be, and we're
trying to figure that out.
And we think
so. It's a problem from the production end, not from the sales end.
It really is. Autumn has done such a nice job. Putting enough thought into these products that we've had very few misses, which is shocking.
Well, also when it comes to our collagen too, is like most collagen comes from the hooves and the hides, and it's a very, intensive process, right? And ours is just bones, and we just boil it down. So which
I think is unique. I've never heard of anybody else doing that.
Yeah, we haven't really either. And so that's why we don't have these facilities that we can just knock on their door and say, hey, will you just mass produce this? It's like we kind of have to create these systems and facilities to do these novel procedures and processes.
Yeah, I've become, to my surprise, a fan of my wife, Jen, has been a fan of eating collagen for years. I read an article several years ago about the benefits of collagen with vitamin C and for runners, because it would help rebuild connective tissue, right? And I was having all these issues as a runner with tendonitis in my feet and my lower legs. And, it got to the point where I was pretty regularly having to take 6 weeks off to heal, which if you're an obsessed runner, it's like torture. And adding in collagen, initially I started with Jello, and then now I've transitioned to just using one of your competitors, Vital Proteins collagen, which is from hide, in my coffee every morning. And to my astonishment, I love it. It makes the coffee creamier. It gives this mouthfeel. It doesn't really have a flavor. I haven't used yours yet, but and I haven't been having the connective tissue issues. I've broken through. I always had this 20-mile limit. I couldn't hike or run for more than 20 miles, and I'd start having connective tissue issues. And I just did this 62-mile backpacking trip up in the Sawtooth Mountains, and no issues, no problem. Over 3 days. So that was like 22 miles, 14 miles, 26 miles the last day. And it's been, a night and day thing. And it's one of those, I'm not a fan personally of supplements, but, when you think about it, if we were eating food naturally, we would be eating the tendons, right? Like in Japan, tendons are a delicacy. We'd be eating the gristle. All the stuff that we cut off and throw away or give to the dog, you'd be eating. And that's where all the collagen is.
Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah, I just talked to Dr. Bill Schindler. Do you know who he is?
I've heard of him. Yeah. I have heard of him.
He's like an internationally renowned archaeologist. And he said, and you might be aware of this, but that we were scavengers for a really long period of history, right? And it wasn't until we were just kind of eating what everyone had left over, but it wasn't until we had tools and were able to access the organs, the fat, the blood, like you said, all of the collagen, that we really actually made leaps and bounds in terms of our brain and our body development and evolution. And obviously when we eat those things, that's just like compatible tissue, right? And so, yes, it's going to be broken down and everything, but it is providing nutrients that most of us aren't consuming. So it can be really remarkable. I'm glad you had that scenario, but you got to try ours because we have a chocolate one coming out that in coffee is magic. Just saying.
Oh, really? Okay.
Oh man.
I'll give it a shot. Absolutely. Yeah, it's, but it gets back to, again, I'm still not a fan of supplements, but when you point out, when you realize, oh, I should be eating this, but I'm missing out on it, then, one should figure out some way to correct that. Like you with your organ supplements are in a pill form, I gather.
Yeah. You could see him here. It was just because literally
Okay.
Chaz was like, I'm making dinner tonight. And then he wouldn't tell me and he'd sneak some tripe in or whatever. And I was just like, oh, this
You could
is
tell.
nasty. Yes. And all my friends, I mean, like we're in this bubble, right? But when I tell my friends, my local friends, I'm like, eat some organs. They're like, no. But if I can give them a pill, they're like, okay, like I can get on board with that. It just seems like it's a lot less big of an obstacle if you can just.
Well, and I mean, when I first got into paleo, everybody called liver nature's multivitamin.
Yeah.
And it's true. And I love liver. So I'm one of those weird people who like goes out of my way to make liver and have liver. But I get that for most people, like my wife, it's just like,
Yeah.
I can't eat this. It's horrible, which is
Yeah.
a mystery to me. Oh, I got a funny story to tell you. So we got a dog recently, and like my previous dog, this dog is on a paleo dog diet. And I go to the vet, and the vet's like, I'd like to talk to you about his diet. And I'm like, okay. We feed him a 1/4 pound of liver every morning. This is a 9-pound dog, by the way, at the time, eating a 1/4 pound of liver in the morning every day, right?
Wow.
And the vet's like, I'm really concerned about this dog's nutrition. And he said, but I'm not a nutritionist. Here's a website that I recommend people to go to. And so I did. And they had, so basically, it was for people who were feeding their dog a real food diet. And they had all these entries to put food in. They had a grain column and a vegetable column and a fruit column and a meat column. They didn't have a place to put liver in, right? So they said, okay, you're not, your dog's not getting enough nutrition. You need to buy our supplement. And I go back and I look at their explanation for why a dog would need a supplement. And the explanation was, I kid you not, dogs don't eat enough liver in the modern food system. And so we have to supplement with the nutrients that would be in liver. And I went back to the vet and I was like, I appreciate your concern. It was a useful website, but they're saying you need to buy our supplement because your dog's not getting enough liver. He's getting 5% of his body weight in liver every flipping day. I think he's okay. But I've looked, as somebody who likes recipes, or who likes liver and likes cooking, I bought a book once, How to Cook Everything, and it was like 1,000 recipes. And I went to the index, no liver, not a single liver recipe.
Wow.
So these vets are onto something, right? Because nobody's feeding their dogs liver because nobody's eating liver. They don't have it in the house. They don't know how to cook it. They can't even find a recipe for it in their recipe book.
Oh, I know. Isn't it sad? I mean, there's a palpable change in my energy level since I started taking it. And just
really.
Yeah, and I have a guy, and I remember when he started taking it, I think he was like 65, and he just wrote me, it was like, oh my gosh, I'm doing push-ups and pull-ups, and like I've never had such stamina. But they've done an animal trial where they actually literally put rats, they gave some B vitamins. These were all just normal rats, and then some the liver and something like a normal rat chow. And then they saw how long they could swim. And I think it was like 16 minutes and 18 minutes on the B vitamins, the regular. And it was like 85 minutes. And sometimes the rats who received liver were still swimming at the end. And so they just ended the experiment. So there's some sort of like unidentified anti-fatigue factor, I think maybe above and beyond the nutrients that are already in there, although it might just be them. But so
that's interesting. So just for background for the listeners, the rat swim test, it sounds kind of cruel, but they basically put a rat in a bucket of water, I guess, and see how long it can swim before it sinks under the waves.
Yes, isn't that awful?
And it's awful, yeah. And it's kind of but it's a good measurement of how healthy the animal is, right? And I know they've used that in ketogenic diet tests that I've read about, where the rats on the ketogenic diet swim like 3 or 4 times as long as the rats on the high carb diet. So there's it's clearly a really good test, and it's really interesting. I haven't seen that particular one, but just supplementing with liver and the vitamins and minerals in liver had that big of an effect on the animal. That's incredible.
Yeah, I'll send you that study for sure. So you can look at, I think it was done in the 1950s, so it's an old one, but.
Well, yeah, that was, nowadays I was just, listening to some scientists talking about the limitations on the studies they can do in animals. A lot of those things they can't do anymore. So like, oh, the poor little rats, they're not going to be happy swimming for their lives.
Which might be true.
Which might be true, but
Yeah.
say what me. I have less sympathy for rats than I do. As a former New York City dweller, I don't have much sympathy for rats in general.
That makes sense.
So tell us about this, though. You mentioned when we were talking before the show that you're pursuing a graduate degree.
Yeah, Tucker. Oh, well, basically, I am someone that is never going to stop learning, probably like you. And I just have this humility in me. Like, there's just so much more to learn all the time. And like, also just, I want to be able to help people and go to like the original research so that I can just understand everything from the ground up. So yeah, I decided after my master's, I wanted to go get back and get my doctorate so I could really do all the beautiful people who work for this company.
So you're gonna get a nutrition degree and start producing plant-based
Oh, no, that's exactly the opposite. In fact, I'm like knee deep in beef research. I mean, I'm really looking into like how feeding an animal or cow specifically a different diet impacts the nutritional profile of their final product, because we have this push away from meat, right, in the mainstream narrative. And it just doesn't make sense. And I know there's you're very familiar with the like evidence around saturated fat and how it's contradictory, but for most people, they don't understand it. And I also want to give the farmers and ranchers raising animals with grass fed, in those regiments, a health reason to do so, because I think that there is a lot of really cool research in that area. And so, yeah, that's why I'm getting the doctorate, doing the dissertation, working with some brilliant scientists, and just excited.
Stephen Van Vliet. Am I saying? I'm butchering his name, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, you're right. Stefan Van Vliet.
Van Vliet. Okay. Yeah, he's the guy who published that brilliant paper comparing I think it was Beyond Beef or the Impossible Burger to actual beef.
Yes.
Because their claim initially was and when I heard this, I knew enough to know it was BS, but their initial claim was our product will be as nutritious as beef. And what they did is they basically matched the nutrition label of beef, right? And if you ever spend any time reading nutrition labels, they leave so much out about what's actually in a product. I mean, what's actually most of what's, first off, say you make a beef stick and it's all beef. Most of what's in the beef never makes it to the nutrition label. So it's really easy to match that with plant proteins because you're not including all the important stuff.
Right. And that's the thing, like it's been kind of a leap in like metabolomic analyses. They've been able to, because we look at like 13 nutrients on a food label. We track about 150 in our databases, but there are literally tens of thousands of nutrients that we are consuming on a regular basis that most people are not taking into account, like you said, on these label comparisons. So what his research is doing is looking at those thousands of metabolites and showing, I think in that particular study, 90% of the metabolites were different. And a lot of times when they're matching protein, they're not taking into consideration that vegetable proteins are lower quality proteins. They're not as bioavailable. They don't contain the same amino acid profile, and proteins.
Well, now they're getting sued for doing that because apparently they're by law supposed to take that into account, and they didn't.
Right. Yeah, there's a really fascinating guy named Dr. Peter Ballerstadt. Are you familiar with him?
Yeah, the sod father, everybody calls him. I've met him a few times. Neat guy.
Exactly, and he talks about that. It's just animal protein not the same as plant protein, and every protein has a very unique amino acid profile. And so just to look at the labels and call them the same is misleading. And like you said, that's why they're up against some lawsuits and not selling as well, I think, at least in the Impossible Burger realm, as they thought they would.
Yeah, well, no shock here.
I know, I haven't even brought myself to try one yet, but
Yeah, I don't have any. I've tried, tofu, I used to eat a lot of tofu because I would go to Asian restaurants and, fried tofu's tasty. But now that I know what it's fried in, unfortunately, one of the foods that I just can't eat anymore is Chinese food unless I make it myself, because it's,
Yeah.
it's everything soaked. I'm super gluten sensitive, and everything soaked in soy sauce with wheat. So it's just off the menu, which is a real bummer. But, if you make your own, it's better than what you eat in most restaurants. So tell us about your restaurant.
Oh, John, do you want to start just like giving us the overview?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the problems, the jigsaw puzzle that you're dealing with when you're working on whole animal utilization is there's a disproportionate balance between how many steaks your customers would like and how many steaks come off of an animal.
Yeah, as anybody who's bought a quarter cow knows, you're like, what is this thing? I've never heard of this bit before.
So a lot of those bits end up, being turned into ground beef. So you end
which
up,
is fine.
Which is fine, absolutely. It's just a little more challenging to sell, both just because obviously the price isn't as high,
Right.
And so one way that we are able to take care of our ground beef in a profitable way is we sell it to Paleovalley and turn it into beef sticks, or we sell it to our restaurant and we then turn it into higher priced hamburgers that is a lot more than you would get for it in the supermarket or something like that.
Right.
And then we also are able to use a lot of the other byproducts. We use some of our bones. We use some bone broth in the restaurant. We have the tallow for the French fries and the other fried goods and all the cooking oils. And we sell a lot of beef, pork and chicken as well in the restaurant.
Okay, so how many restaurants do you have?
One so far.
Okay, in Boulder, what's it called?
It's called Wild Pastures Burger Company. So
okay, great.
And
that's awesome.
Relatively new. We're still under a year old. I think we're coming up on the grand opening anniversary here pretty soon. But it's going pretty well. It's a nice market to be in.
Well, Boulder's a weird market though, because it's probably 50% of the people are vegans and the other 50% are carnivores. Is that a fair way to describe the eating scene? They have like pitch battles in the streets on the way to the Whole Foods.
Oh my gosh, you're so funny. And I think you're right, because I did go the other day down to Pearl Street, which is one of the main streets in Boulder. And I was just like, because we're doing a docuseries kind of thing. And I was like, what are your thoughts on saturated fat? And what do you think? Half of them were like, it's the worst thing you can do for your health. And the other half were like, it's essential. We have to
inject it directly into my veins.
So you're right. It's just very different views. And we haven't gotten any negative pushback yet. In fact, we had you'll appreciate this like huge international corporation of potato producers come to our restaurant and have us kind of give a presentation about regenerative ag and how it's the future of food. And so it seems like people are supporting us from all sides so far.
Well, that's interesting. We'll have to follow up with that after, because obviously I'm here in Idaho and we're in the process of starting up a not-for-profit to help get this seed oil message out. And folks I would obviously like to talk to are Idaho potato producers, because they've got simultaneously the healthiest and the most unhealthy food, depending on what you fry it in. According to Harvard anyway. John, just background, I think Autumn and I talked about this before. Harvard did a study where they showed that French fries are the most obesogenic food, and potatoes that aren't fried in seed oils are essentially non-obesogenic. And their conclusion was it's the carbohydrates and not the obvious one. Gee,
right.
What ingredient are you adding to a baked potato to make it a French fry?
Yeah.
The seed oils you're frying it in. Anyway, that's getting a little off topic here, but you guys use tallow. That's awesome. I've, years ago, I got Anthony Bourdain's Le Havre cookbook, and he had a French fry recipe. And he described, I think they used peanut oil in the restaurant. And then he had this little parenthetical comment: if you really want to do it right, use beef tallow. So I did. And A, they're so much better. They're so much crispier. And B, they fill you up. It's not like you can eat a bucket of French fries like the size you get at McDonald's nowadays. You have some of them and you're like, wow, I'm full. These are delicious.
Can I tell you that's the most pronounced difference I've noticed in my child? Like my child loves French fries, and anytime we'd go out to a restaurant, would just eat them, and there was never enough. And then, but since we have our French fries here, it's like there comes a point where he just stops. And I'm just like, wow, yeah, it's very, very big.
He's getting the satiety signal.
Exactly. He's not having that endocannabinoid system.
Exactly. Malfunction. Right. Exactly. Yeah, it's amazing when you see that yourself, when you start to understand the chemical pathways behind it. You're like, oh my goodness, this actually works in humans. Here's my son. No, I'm done with the French fries, whereas nobody ever is done with McDonald's French fries. So the restaurant's doing well, I hope.
It was a strange time to open it during the pandemic.
Yeah,
but yes,
true.
yes. But it's been an upward trajectory for sure.
Yeah, we're very encouraged, and you know, I mean, it's just, and those 50% of older that are our customers are enthused, and it made us think that, you know, we're in, you know, a good position going forward. So
there's a I can't remember the chain right now. I'll look it up, but back in Connecticut, there was a chain of restaurants that did grass-fed burgers, and they, you know, they had a really neat menu idea. They had a menu, both sides were basically the same, but the front side was a omnivore menu and the back side was a vegan menu. But right, so you'd flip it over and they would have swap out, you know, like the grass-fed burger for an Impossible Burger, whatever they use. I thought that was a great idea. I mean, personally, I don't have a problem with people who want to eat that way. I think there's some problems with eating that way, but you know, it's a free country. But you know, it was an interesting idea, especially when half of your customers are going to walk by your restaurant. Just a thought. But
no, we do have that, and yeah, we actually added a vegetarian option. We have a great chef friend here, and he just knocked it out of the park. And so it's good. We do have a veggie burger. And John, sorry, I interrupted you.
Well, that's all right. We did start the restaurant thinking we don't need a vegetarian or vegan option, and it became very clear very early on that, you know, while, you know, people come in with their families, and you know, there are some, you know, people in families that have different dietary restrictions or preferences.
Yeah.
So preferences, I'd say, yeah. And so we added that shortly with you know, with the help of a great chef, and you know, it's just been a little more inclusive that way.
That's great to hear. Yeah, it's good. I mean, and that's, you know, kind of an interesting difference between the meat eating community and the not meat eating community is the meat eating community seems to be willing to say, okay, you want to eat that way, go ahead. It's not my choice. Whereas nobody in the meat eating community is looking to ban vegetables. At least not that I've ever run across.
No, yeah, we're very like live and let live. And I do talk a lot about the nutritional, you know, detriments. Sometimes there's some, you know, you have to add things in if you're going to do the vegan and vegetarian diet. But I understand for ethical reasons why some people just really have a hard time with it. And we want to support them too and let them have French fries that don't have vegetable oil on them. So, yeah.
Right. That's great. So talk a little, John, talk a little bit about the biggest problem I would guess with a company like yours. Grass-fed beef is pretty easy to do because pretty much all cows are grass-fed for the beginning of their life anyway, when they're out on the range. What about chicken and pork?
So, yeah, chicken and pork, I mean, it really has to, it's more about the raising practices and make sure they're not, you know, held in confinement the entire time. And then also chicken and pork will consume grains and can help. And
yeah, all day long.
Yes. So, you know, and making sure that those are high quality grains, non-GMO, stuff like that. So the feeding requirements for these animals are, you know, very important to us, but really it's just, you know, keeping them out of confinement. You know, none of the chicken or the pork that we sell, you know, grows up in confinement, and it's not, you know, it doesn't have any greenwashed label claims that might, you know, fool the consumer into thinking that it's something that it's not.
Yeah, and I think I know I've talked to a lot of people, and I certainly didn't understand that when you hear cage free, that means, yes, they're not in a cage, but they're still in a giant barn that they never see the outside of, or when what was the other term?
Free range.
Oh, free range, where It means that in the giant barn, there's a little door at one end and they can leave if they would like to, but none of them actually do because they're afraid of the sun.
Yeah, and there's no water outside of that door. There isn't water. It's directly in the sunlight. I mean, I wouldn't go out there. So
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not going out. So yeah, it's very important. Like our chicken farmers open up the pens every night to allow these chickens to range free. I mean, they do, because of predators and stuff like that. Chickens do need to have some type of shelter to keep them, from being at risk.
Eaten.
And we work with a number of different, practices. We also work with chicken producers that, use the Joel Salatin method of mobile coops and stuff like that.
Oh, you do? Really? That's fantastic.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're kind of agnostic in that, but we would, when it comes to, these practices, we're not saying that only mobile coops are the way to go, or only, outfits that allow their chickens that have a, there are just a lot of different ways to do it. You can rest a chicken pen that's not mobile for a long enough time if you don't need to have chickens on there all the time. So that pasture and that land has the ability to regenerate before you bring chickens back to that coop. So there are a lot of different ways to accomplish the same goal. But every farmer that we've worked with, we've gone out and viewed their practices, and there are multiple ways to accomplish the same goal.
Okay, interesting. So you really are pursuing the Joel Salatin model of multiple animals. So are most of your producers producing all three meats for you?
No, I was referring to just the mobile chicken coops that he's written about. But we are, some of our beef producers do also do pork, but our chicken currently would, they might bring in some cattle to when the growth is overgrowth and they need to get it down to the level that the chickens can consume it. But for the most part, our producers are species specific.
That's interesting, because Salatin's a big part of his approach was that he was able to do all three on similar pastures. I can't remember if he had pork or not, but I know that he definitely had the chickens following around. After the cattle would move out, he would move the chickens in and they would eat all the seeds out of the cow patties, which is one of those charming aspects of nature that we don't really think about.
Yeah.
But I actually visited his farm years ago on a trip down to Tennessee. I realized I was driving right past it and went in, didn't meet him, but got to see the farm. It's beautiful. I mean, it's not, considering how productive he was, it's not like, it just looked like this pretty postcard farm. It was really neat.
I want to tell you too, Tucker, I think you'd be interested in this. Our pork farmer, one of our pork farmers, did an experiment where he tried to improve the fatty acid ratio, the omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acid ratio in his pork, because conventional pork is typically around a 30 to 35 to 1 ratio.
Right.
And so he found pigs that were actually well adapted to eating grass. That's an important caveat. And then he put some of them on 100% grass, one on 50% grass, and the others just on a grain ration. And then he took that 35 to 1 ratio and brought it down to a 5 to 1 ratio on
which
just
is
grass.
A natural ratio.
It's a natural ratio. And then the half grass, I think, was about 10 to 1. And even if he had the the pigs eating grain, but just allowed them to also be on pasture, he got that down to about a 15% or 15 to 1. So he could cut it in half. And it was I just wanted to say that because I know your audience is really interested in fatty acid. And so the conventional ratio is really, really high. But when you find farmers and ranchers who can help them eat grass, it can really be minimized.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that's almost phase 2 of a project like what you guys are doing. First, just trying to get the feed systems, and then saying, okay, how can we tweak this to get the best possible outputs out of it? And I think folks need to understand that is that you can't go to perfect right off the bat. It's a lot of work in trying to set up an operation like this and get your sources sorted out. You're reinventing agriculture in a lot of ways.
That's the goal. And that's the difference between, wild pasture specifically and other meat delivery services, that we're all domestic and we're all regenerative. And so grass fed is, not grass fed, not grass fed. I mean, it's not a regulated term, and a lot of them are imported and just grass fed, but we ensure that our ecological outcomes are actually being monitored and that it's making measurable improvements and things like that. So yeah. We led with the ecological, but the human health, I think we can naturally assume is there. The benefits are there. And Van Vliet's research on secondary compounds and the fatty acids and everything, he's doing a very big survey of beef in the whole country. And so I got to analyze a little bit of that data, and it's really clear. I mean, you can see it in the fatty acids, what the animal's been eating. And so the science is kind of coming together.
Right. Yeah. Weston Price did that with butter 100 years ago. It's kind of funny that we forgot that, and now glad to see that somebody else is coming around and saying, gee, it matters what you feed these animals.
We got on the Crisco bandwagon, right? And it's just like, woo, and vegetable oils. Yeah. Anyway.
That's amazing. Let's talk about organic for a second. How do you work that? I'm not a big fan of the organic label. I'm a fan of the organic idea. But I know that I've talked to enough farmers back when I was living in Connecticut who did organic practices, but didn't get an organic certification because of how expensive it was.
And that's
I think
exactly right. So
I think of the organic certification as almost a tax on organic producers to kind of keep them out of the marketplace. And I think it's very counterproductive to that effect. But that said, if you want to say it's organic and put it in a store, you got to jump through the hoops. How do you guys handle that part of the story?
So we agree with everything you just said. I mean, all of our producers.
Okay. I'm glad to hear that.
So all of our producers would, have practices that would exceed the requirements of an organic certification. It's just a little cost prohibitive. And when we first started this company, we had a crossroads if we wanted to go organic or not. And we realized that, we decided that we could make a larger impact by not going organic, so that we can keep our costs down. Because when you're competing with conventional products, right, we really want to expand the customer demographic as much as possible, and not only be selling organic meats to the 1%ers. If we want to make an impact in the agriculture industry, we need to be able to sell our products to people that aren't in the 1%, and people that
right.
Don't have a lot of
people
discretion,
who can't afford a $15 pound of hamburger.
Exactly right. So, I mean, that was one way, but that doesn't mean that we sacrificed on our standards, because as you've seen, a lot of people are practicing these ways anyway. They just can't, they don't see the cost benefit, the benefit and the additional cost to have the organic certification. Yeah.
No, my wife was running an organic farm at one point, mainly for herself. And her summary is the organic regs in New York State are basically written by rich ladies in Manhattan who never set foot on a farm. They have no idea what this actually means, and the negative impact it's going to have on production, and the lack of a benefit even worse. So yeah, no, I totally get that. I think that's a good answer. I think too many people get hung up on organic without focusing on the bigger benefits that you guys are able to produce.
I mean, we talked about all those chicken claims. There's a lot of free range organic chicken out there, and those chickens still have organic feed, but they don't feed the barn. So, I mean, it's really important to understand what these different claims mean. And,
well, that's like the funniest thing when you go to the supermarket and you're looking in the egg aisle and you see organic vegetarian grain or fed, and it's like, well, chickens aren't supposed to be vegetarian. I've gone out, this dairy farmer I mentioned, he had roaming chicken coops that he would drag around. And one day I got there too early and there were no chickens, there were no eggs. And he said, well, the eggs are still up in the, in the trailer. You're welcome to go up there. And he pointed up the side of this hill. I got up there and I was surrounded by 150 hungry little dinosaurs pecking at my calves as I was stealing their offspring. I was like, this is one of the most uncomfortable situations of my life. They're definitely not vegetarians. They didn't draw blood, but they were thinking about it.
Yeah. And also the same goes for beef production too. You can be fed grain, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but in organic beef production, that's the possibility. And also you don't have to be on pasture. Usually they are for the length of the grazing season, but that's not I think it's up to 120 days is mandatory, but the rest of the time they can be in some sort of confinement.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, another thing we touched on. Talk about the chickens.
So the chicken,
Okay, so I'm going to lead into this. I had a farmer in Connecticut, and I went to visit his farm, and he had just started doing pasture chickens. And this guy, by the way, had my garage door code. He would just drive down and open up my garage door and go in and put meat right into my fridge.
Mhm.
So it was a pretty tight relationship with this dude. And he was telling me that when he started, he got regular broiler chickens and he put them out on pasture, and they started eating, and their breast muscles kept growing and growing and growing, and they all fell over and landed on their chests and couldn't get up and couldn't move and all died.
Mhm.
And he wound up having to get, I think he went to France and got a heritage breed that was able to walk around for its entire life. It was the most amazing thing I'd ever heard.
Yeah, it's fascinating when you start looking at the genetics and see what these birds are capable, and what, some of these, unfortunately, some of these, like you said, these broilers aren't designed to be even moving around like that. So when you try to put them on pasture, their feet suffer, their health suffers, because they're really, they're just not biologically designed to be out
They're
there.
bred to be in a cage.
Exactly right. And it's a shame, but one of the chicken outfits that we work with, they have their own genetic line of chickens, and these are heritage breeds that and they're the ones that are in these stationary coops. But these coops, I've been out there, and they open them up every morning, and these birds cannot wait to just run out of these they are sheltered for the night, and scavenge on the bugs and insects and grass that surround these coops. And you can see these chickens can jump 4 or 5 feet in the air. Well, you wouldn't see a broiler.
Can't do.
Yeah, they
Broiler can't lift itself off the ground.
Yeah. So I mean it's really fascinating to see. And then also we see the similars, and we see the same chickens used in those mobile chicken coops, and those work well as well.
Right. Interesting. That's another thing. It never even occurred to me that you wouldn't be able to just take, a Tyson chicken and throw it out on the field, on a meadow, and have it be totally fine. I mean, that's kind of crazy. I get, hey, they have been really good at producing a lot of protein. They just, they've kind of lost sight of a few things.
Mhm.
And I'm sure a lot of these guys are. Have you converted any chicken farmers over to this production method? What sort of impact are you seeing there? Because I've heard lots of stories about how miserable it is to be a chicken farmer with, Tyson buying up 100% of your production, and you're just almost like a serf on their land.
Yeah, and we've seen a lot of farmers convert to work with me. A lot of the partners that we work with to source our chickens, they are in the business of converting more and more farmers all the time to, raising with regenerative, practices in mind. And a lot of the chickens that use the stationary coops, I mean, those are conventional chicken coops that are modified to have swinging doors to allow access to the outdoors. So, I mean, you could be a conventional chicken farmer and make with very, very little costs, added, you could convert those chicken coops into, a pasture-raised system. But that said, I mean, you do need to let the land rest when it comes to that. So it's, that is the increased cost, is you might need more land, because you need to allow the ground and the soil and the
plants to grow back,
generate, over time.
Yeah, no, one of my egg sources in Connecticut, they had these round coops that they would move around the meadow, and you could tell where it had just been because it was like this circle of dirt. They would eat everything. They would eat the grass right down to the ground, pull up the roots, and literally when they were down to dirt, then they would move it to the next section. And the best eggs I've ever had in my life. But I mean, it never occurred to me that that's a chicken's diet. So yeah, no, I get, you can't, if you just have a building in the middle of a meadow, it's pretty much going to be a building in the middle of a field of dirt.
Right. Yeah, if you want to allow it to time. But yeah, the argument for people that don't think chickens eat grass, that takes about 1 day to demonstrate how
Yeah.
quickly they can eat that down to nothing. So it's pretty powerful stuff when you get to see it,
With
in
your
real
own
life.
eyes.
Yep.
That's great. Okay. Anything I'm missing that you guys want to talk about? We've been going for almost an hour and a half now, so I want to be cognizant of your time. I think this has been a fantastic discussion. Any points that you want to make that I haven't gotten into?
I don't think so. I think other than I think for the chickens, for the creating the heirloom genetics, it's really important not only for the health of the animal, but also for the health of our food security system, because we've really kind of gotten very narrow into these are the birds that create the big breasts and to create the most meat quickly. But in terms of if there's ever like a pathogen comes out and knocks that breed out, then we're in a lot of trouble. So I just wanted to say I think that's a really notable and important point as well. That's
and there is a bird influenza going around right now. And I mean, I was just talking to somebody the other day about pig diseases that go through these things, and they just, wipe out entire populations of food animals. I mean, there's a big one going around in China right now, and the Chinese, have been buying up pig farms in the United States to make sure that they have enough food to feed their people, which is, good for them. But I think a lot of us were shocked in the COVID years when they're rationing meat in the supermarkets. That was kind of a novel thing for Americans to experience, and I think a lot of people have realized that having a more resilient, robust food system is kind of important.
It's so important. And lastly, if we really looked at the costs of our conventional system, in terms of the degradation of our soil and how our animals are treated and the pollution in the air, and like you said, these outbreaks sometimes of bird flu or whatever, and if we really had to pay for that as well at the register, it wouldn't make sense. They'd be unaffordable. And so we're just trying to bring agriculture back to one that is, beneficial for the human consumer, the planet, the animals, and all the things.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. It's great to hear the success you guys are having. I mean, considering not too long ago, folks were saying it wasn't possible to do something like this. It's very cool to hear you doing it. And it's great to hear. I mean, I think the most heartening thing you said was ranchers calling you up and saying, we want to be part of this. That's just phenomenal.
It's been really nice to see.
Yep. Saving the world one cow at a time. Pretty cool.
Well, thank you, Tucker.
Yep,
okay, no, it's been a great conversation. John, thank you very much for making the time to talk today. And Autumn, it's been terrific again. And we'll probably put some more show notes together. Hopefully it won't be as long as the last one, but and I will put a link to the interview you did with me and to your, to your company, so folks can find it. And anybody who's in Boulder, it sounds like a visit to your burger place is a must. Thank you guys very much.
Thanks,
Thanks, Tucker. Enjoyed it.